The demise of USS Indianapolis not only stands as one of the deadliest disasters in the history of the United States Navy, but it has also become a case study in communication failures, accountability, and the human cost of war. But Indianapolis was more than just that. She served with distinction throughout the Pacific Theater, and for the better part of the last 2 years of the Pacific War, she was the flagship of the greatest naval armada ever assembled in modern times. Indianapolis was the second ship of the Portland class to be built, which overall was the third U.S. Navy 8-inch gun cruiser design. The successes of the preceding Pensacola and Northampton classes were carried over into her class, while attempts were made to correct the deficiencies that had been discovered within those designs. One of those deficiencies was their lack of adequate armor. With 5 inches of main belt and 2.5 inches of deck armor, Indianapolis and her sister had much better protection against the 8-inch shell fire of their contemporaries than their predecessors did. She was armed with a main battery of 9 8-inch 55 caliber guns, which were housed in 3 triple turrets that were arranged in the 2-in-1 layout. This configuration was another design element that was carried over from the Northampton class. For air defense, she carried a battery of 8 5-inch 25 caliber guns, 4 of which were located amidships on each broadside, and several 47mm Hotchkiss guns, although these were mainly used for saluting purposes. Indianapolis had 2 amidships catapults and could carry up to 4 float planes, which were used for observation and to spot the fall of shot. Rated for 107,000 shaft horsepower, she is capable of making a brisk 33 knots. All in all, her design was quite capable and a step in the right direction for the U.S. Navy. Indianapolis was commissioned in the United States Navy on November 15, 1932, at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. After spending almost the entirety of her first year in the Atlantic, she headed to the Pacific in late 1933, where she would remain for the majority of her career. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Indianapolis was conducting a simulated bombardment of Johnston Atoll when she received news of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. She subsequently searched for the Japanese until the 13th, when she returned to Pearl Harbor for fuel and provisions. Indianapolis was back at sea 2 days later and steaming towards the Marshall Islands alongside the aircraft carrier Lexington for a diversionary attack that was meant to draw Japanese attention away from embattled Wake Island. The raid was canceled on the 20th, and the force shifted to screen the relief force that was steaming toward Wake Island. 3 days later, though, the mission was completely abandoned after Japanese forces seized the island. Indianapolis spent January patrolling Hawaiian waters before departing for the South Pacific with Lexington's task force on January 31st. On February 20th, as the force was maneuvering into position to launch an airstrike on the Japanese base at Rabaul, they were spotted and attacked by 18 medium bombers. With the element of surprise now gone, the strike was canceled. Indianapolis continued screening Lexington over the subsequent weeks, including during the strikes on Lae and Salamaua on March 10th. In late March, she was dispatched for an overhaul at the Mare Island Naval Yard. Upon the completion of her overhaul, Indianapolis escorted a convoy to Australia before heading north to the frigid waters of the North Pacific. Over the next year, she operated throughout the Aleutian Islands, with the highlight of her time in the theater being the sinking of a Japanese cargo ship on February 19, 1943. The cruiser's 8-inch guns made quick work of the vessel, which exploded with such force that she most likely was laden down with ammunition. No survivors were recovered. After undergoing another overhaul during the summer of 1943, she reported to Pearl Harbor in early August. There, Vice Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, the commander of the Central Pacific Force, chose Indianapolis to be his flagship. On November 10th, she got on her way for operations in the Gilbert Islands. Assigned to the Southern Attack Force, she bombarded targets throughout Tarawa Atoll on November 19th before shifting to Macon Atoll the next day. Indianapolis then returned to Tarawa on the 21st and provided fire support there until the atoll was declared secure on the afternoon of the 23rd. Next up were the Marshall Islands, the conquest of which began in late January of 1944. Indianapolis bombarded targets throughout Kwajalein Atoll from January 31st until the atoll was declared secure on February 3rd. She then supported the landings at Eniwetok Atoll in mid-February. After some rest, she joined the Fast Carrier Task Force for strikes on the Palau and Western Carolina Islands in late March. After the completion of these strikes, she was detached once more for an overhaul at Mare Island. Indianapolis rejoined the fleet in late May just as operations in the Mariana Islands were set to begin. She shelled the island of Saipan in the days leading up to the June 15th amphibious assault and provided on-call fire support once the troops were ashore. On the 18th, Indianapolis cleared the gun line and rejoined the fast carrier task force in preparation for the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Although she only had a minor role in the battle, Indy's gunners did splash one of the few Japanese planes that managed to get through the U.S. Combat Air Patrol on June 19th, as it bore down on the light carrier USS Princeton. On the 23rd, she resumed her fire support duties off Saipan, and for the next month and a half she supported operations throughout the Marianas. Indianapolis then supported amphibious landings in the Palau Islands in mid-September, before heading to Mare Island for what would be the last overhaul of her career. She rejoined the Fast Carrier Task Force in mid-February of 1945 and subsequently screened the carriers of Task Group 58.3 as their planes struck the greater Tokyo area a few days later. Once these strikes were in the books, the Fast Carrier Task Force shifted east to support the landings on Iwo Jima, and Indianapolis shelled that island on the 19th and 20th. Afterwards, another round of strikes on Tokyo was conducted between the 25th and 27th of February. 2 weeks later, Indianapolis was detached from the Fast Carrier Task Force and assigned to the Fire Support Group for the invasion of Okinawa. On March 26th, she began pounding targets around Hagushi Beach and continued to do so for the next 6 days. During this time, she underwent numerous aerial attacks and splashed a total of 6 planes while assisting with 2 others, but her luck would soon run out. On the morning of March 31st, Indy's lookout spotted a Japanese fighter, a Nakajima Ki-43, as it was about to begin its dive. Just before striking the main deck, the plane's left wingtip struck the splinter shield of the aft 20mm gun platform, which caused the plane's bomb to prematurely release. The bomb sliced straight through her and exploded in the water directly under her keel, which blew 2 gaping holes in her bottom. The blast and subsequent flooding ended up killing 9 of her men. Indianapolis immediately limped to a salvage ship for emergency repairs, where an inspection the next day revealed that her propeller shafts were damaged, her fuel tanks were ruptured, and her water distilling equipment was ruined. Temporary repairs were made, and Indianapolis soon began the long journey to Mare Island. While at Mare Island, fate reared its head, as it often does in warfare. After her repairs were completed, Indianapolis received orders to proceed at best speed to Tinian Island with a special cargo. The heavy cruiser USS Pensacola was originally slated to carry out this mission, but when her engines failed during her sea trials, it fell to Indianapolis as she was the next available vessel. She subsequently ditched the normal availability period that every vessel undergoes after repairs or an overhaul, as the cargo desperately needed to be delivered. Unbeknownst to her and her crew at the time, the cargo they were carrying included parts and materials for the atomic bombs that would soon be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Indianapolis departed San Francisco on July 16th and reached Pearl Harbor 74.5 hours later, which set a record for the fastest time for that stretch of ocean, which, as far as I can tell, still stands to this day. Her average speed for the journey was 29 knots. After refueling, Indianapolis raced on to the Mariana Islands, where she dropped anchor off Tinian on July 26th. She ended up covering a distance of almost 5,000 nautical miles in only 10 days. After the cargo was unloaded, she moved on to Guam, where she reported for routing to Leyte. From Leyte, she was to report for further duty off Okinawa. Indianapolis departed Guam on the 28th and proceeded towards Leyte without any escorts. 5 minutes after midnight on July 30th, 1945, all hell broke loose aboard Indianapolis after she was struck by 2 torpedoes on her starboard side in quick succession, which had been fired by the Japanese submarine I-58. Within seconds, 60 feet of her bow was gone, and her 4 engine rooms were out of commission. The second torpedo strike tore a hole in her amidships, with the blast lifting her out of the water and slightly altering her course. Roused from his slumber by the explosions, Captain Charles B. McVay III, upon reaching the bridge, immediately ordered a distress call to be broadcasted. At first, McVay believed that the ship could be saved. It was a reasonable thought at that moment, as several pre-war treaty cruisers like his had their bows ripped off earlier in the war by Japanese torpedoes and had survived. New Orleans and Minneapolis, for example. But reports from his subordinates soon revealed the truth, and he rightly gave the order to abandon ship. As men began jumping into the sea, Indianapolis's list went from 15 degrees to 60 and then to 90 in only a matter of minutes. Within 15 minutes of the torpedo strikes, she had rolled completely over. Her stern then rose high into the night sky, almost straight up according to survivors, before she slipped beneath the surface of the ocean. The ordeal for the 900 or so men now in the water was just beginning. even though the men in her radio room were able to get off an SOS message, unfortunately for various reasons it was not acted upon by any of the 3 radio stations that had received it. Her survivors drifted for the next 3.5 days until Lieutenant Chuck Wynn spotted some of them on August 2nd while on a routine patrol. Wynn immediately radioed their position before dropping a life raft and some life-saving equipment. A PBY Catalina flown by Lieutenant Commander Robert Adrian Marks soon arrived, and against standing orders, Marks decided to land his aircraft to pick up survivors. He was able to maneuver his plane and pick up 56 men. That evening, the remaining survivors were rescued by the destroyer escort Cecil J. Doyle and 6 other smaller ships. During those 3+ days, many of the survivors died from their wounds, exhaustion, exposure, or a combination of the 3. Sharks were drawn to the drifting groups of men, and after picking off the dead, they began attacking the living as well. Most of the survivors were found in some state of delirium, and some were suffering hallucinations from exposure. In the end, only 316 men of the nearly 900 who had survived the sinking survived their time in the water. The shocking part of this is that the U.S. Navy wasn't even aware that Indianapolis had been sunk until the survivors were spotted on August 2nd. If not for Lieutenant Gwynn, they would not have known or had a clue about where a 10,000-ton, 600-foot-long heavy cruiser with almost 1,200 American sons, fathers, and brothers had gone, at least until records after the war had been examined at best. Multiple commands and multiple officers failed Indy's crew. In fact, the system that was used to track Navy vessels back then was inadequate and flawed. Naval personnel at Guam and Leyte both kept plotting boards that plotted the positions of all vessels with which the headquarters were concerned. However, it was pretty much just assumed that ships as large as Indianapolis would reach their destinations on time. Therefore, the plotting boards were based on predictions and not on actual reports. On the 31st, when Indianapolis should have arrived at Leyte, she was removed from the board on Guam, and she was also recorded as having arrived when in fact she hadn't. If the system for reporting ship movements wasn't bad enough, what was worse was that the officer responsible for tracking the movements of Indianapolis, Lieutenant Stuart B. Gibson, knew of the vessel's failure to arrive on schedule and failed to investigate the matter or even report it to his superiors. In the litany of failures that led to Indy's men suffering, this, in my opinion, is the most egregious of them, and honestly was criminally negligent. While he didn't cause her sinking, his actions, or inaction, caused her men to suffer for an additional 2 days. For his inaction, Gibson only received a letter of reprimand. Unfortunately, the man who ended up with the harshest punishment of all was Captain McVay. He was court-martialed on 2 charges, hazarding his vessel and failing to order his men to abandon ship. He was ultimately cleared of the second charge, but was found guilty of hazarding his vessel by failing to zigzag. McVay's orders had been to zigzag at his discretion, weather permitting. However, McVay was not informed that a Japanese submarine was operating in the vicinity of his route, despite evidence that one might be. Commander Mochisora Hashimoto, the commanding officer of I-58, even testified at McVay's court-martial that zigzagging would have made no difference on the outcome. Although the Navy lost about 380 vessels in combat during World War II, McVay was the only captain to be court-martialed for the loss of his ship. His sentence was ultimately overturned by Navy Secretary James Forcell not long after, owing to McVay's bravery prior to the sinking, and McVay was finally promoted to Rear Admiral when he retired in 1949. However, many folks, including many of Indy's survivors, still believe that the Navy's verdict was unjust and fought for him until he was completely exonerated by Congress in October of 2000. For over 7 decades, USS Indianapolis laid unseen on the ocean floor, with her final resting place unknown to the world. But in July of 2016, new information emerged regarding her possible location when naval records were discovered, indicating that another U.S. vessel had recorded passing by Indianapolis 11 hours before she was sunk. This information allowed researchers to determine that Indianapolis had been moving faster and was therefore further west than previously assumed, as well as slightly off course. A year later, her wreck was located at a depth of 18,000 feet. The main part of the wreck lies in an enormous impact crater, and her bow lies about 1.5 miles east of it. Her 2 forward 8-inch guns, which came loose when the ship rolled over, lie a half-mile east of the main wreck and mark her last position while she was on the surface. Indianapolis was awarded 10 battle stars for her service during World War II. If you made it this far, thank you, and if you enjoyed my video, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell as well. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.